This is a Q Media production.
Today on the podcast, we explore the intersection of AI, data, and business transformation with technology leader Lawrence Puang. Lawrence is the innovative founder behind Talent First AI, and he's dedicated his career to solving really difficult commercial problems using very clever AI solutions. Formerly an executive at Quantium, he has spearheaded initiatives that have revolutionized ad targeting and measurement, garnering recognition from industry giants like Facebook. Join us today as we discuss workplace analytics, how data can improve employee engagement and performance, and the ethical considerations of AI. This episode is packed with AI insights and ideas on how you can use it to help your employees excel. Enjoy the episode. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for being on today.
Hey, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
So now, Lawrence, you work in the world of AI, and we hear about it all the time. It is absolutely ubiquitous. Tell me, is AI real or is it hype?
Yeah, look, the current AI hype really has come around because of everyone knows about ChatGPT and OpenAI, but actually AI, especially in the corporate and business world in which we operate, has actually been around for a while. And so, whilst there is hype today about generative AI and large language models, other technologies like machine learning, AI, personalization, recommendation engines have been around for a decade in the corporate world. What we're seeing today, though, is more organizations are starting to adopt, but there are barriers to adoption that's currently happening right now, which is, geez, my data is all over the place, and I didn't realize that. Geez, my data's not as protected as it should be, and I didn't realize that. And so you like, because of all this current hype around AI, which is a good and bad thing, you're actually seeing some underlying foundational issues that are starting to surface that's preventing organizations from actually adopting AI at scale. There is most people will probably heard of the Gartner hype cycle, where you have this massive excitement around this new technology, and everyone's thinking it's going to change the world and change everything, before they realize, well, actually we invested all this money and the early returns we're seeing aren't quite there yet. And I think that's what some organizations are currently seeing at the moment. But what will happen is the ones that persist and pursue use cases, experimentation, etc., will figure it out, and we will hit a point where those returns that were promised early in the cycle will come. It will just take more years than we actually think it takes.
So it sounds like the real key to getting through this is being bold and maybe a bit brazen. So to actually push through, because I'm guessing you see a lot of companies that look at it and go, this is actually all a little bit too hard.
Yeah, and look, it really depends on on your risk appetite as an organization and where leaders see their business and where they see themselves. It does take courage. You're asking an organization to change the way they're doing things and potentially impacting people's roles and jobs, right? And that's scary. And so it does take a courageous leader. And it also does take someone who is open to new ideas rather than the way they've always done things, which is largely based on gut instinct and experience. So yes.
So before we go a little bit deeper into the AI piece, I actually want to just chat about you, because you've got a really interesting background. So you were originally an actuary. So how have we gone from actuary to AI?
Oh, to be honest, when I first entered the profession, I didn't know what an actuary was. It was one of those, I went to a career fair and I walked in and asked, hey, when you graduate, who paid the highest job? Who had the highest paying job? And someone had said, hey, actuary. I was like, okay, this might be interesting. And actually the profession I went through, there was lots of maths and combination of business. So it's actually quite an interesting intersection versus your traditional mathematics, statistics, or computing science degrees. Came out and joined this. It was a startup at the time, Quantium. I was the 15th employee, and frankly, in the early days, we were just experimenting a lot. Most of us were actuaries back then, but the whole premise and the whole idea of the business was, how do you take some of the things that traditional actuaries do, like working out how long someone's going to live for life insurance purposes, or how much premiums you should pay for your car and home insurance, to, well, how do you work out what's the impact of different media channels on advertising? How do you work out airline ticket pricing? We even did things like, we built, one of my first projects was, we built these web bots that, this was 2005, 2006, right? Web bots are a lot more common now, but 2005, 2006, my first project was we built these web bots where we went and scraped insurance pricing premiums from various different websites like APA, AMIA back in those days, then collected that data and reconstructed their pricing algorithms so that you could use that to better price our clients' insurance premiums, right? And so we were just experimenting and trying all these different things using data and early machine learning algorithms, but we didn't actually know that was AI, data science, and big data. And that term then came around, it would have been 10, 15 years ago, where big data became that big term, data science became a big term, and now obviously AI. So I've got to say, I probably accidentally fell into that space through the startup Quantium, which is obviously now 1,200 people and largely owned by Woolworths. But that's how I got into it.
Sounds like there's a lot of trial and error in what you were doing there when you were at Quantium, because it really was the unknown. Nobody had actually done what you had done there before. How much of that do you still use and do we recommend to clients on their day-to-day when they're setting up their AI now? Because it feels like when you've got a client coming to you and saying, we want to put in some AI, whatever that means for them, they kind of seem quite clear on what they want. How much is there playing and trying things out versus actually knowing where we're going?
Look, I think it depends. It does depend on where the maturity of the organization is at. A lot of organizations that bring us in, I tend to say, you're bringing us in for the 9 different ways not to do things, because we had experimented and tried so many different things. Typically, we find organizations at the lower end of the maturity scale who are just starting out. There are some really low-hanging fruit, low-risk things that they can start to implement and do. Some organizations we work with, don't even have all the data in a single place, so they can, spin up dashboards just to look at their information. Right? That's really low risk, basic stuff. There's other organizations who are much more mature and have already got those things down pat, but they want to try something. They want to try something new, and so they might reserve 10-20% of their effort or resources into trying and testing out new use cases before they so they've got so they're continually pushing the edge in terms of what they can do.
So tell me a little bit about your company. So Talent First AI. So it sounds like you're going into companies and helping them to get started with AI. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Yeah, look, we have this belief and this vision that the future greatest organizations and workforces are going to be AI augmented. And we believe the best companies are going to be combining the best of human and machine intelligence. Okay. And so we started this business to do 2 things. One is help organizations get prepared for that world. And a lot of that is around just getting some of your foundational data infrastructure into place and just getting your data into a single place. How do you overlay data governance across your data from a privacy, security, confidentiality perspective. How do you have the right capabilities in place, and actually put together a strategy of what to do with that information you now have. And so some of the early things is, let's just get a quick win, right? Let's do a real small pilot project, test this out, show what it can do for your executives and how they can use that information to make decisions. And that often snowballs into all of these other ideas about, this is what we can do. What if we applied it to this area, into the HR area, the marketing area, logistics? It gets quite exciting pretty quickly. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, we've then found two particular niches in which organizations want to turbocharge their capability. The first is around retail media, right? And for those that don't know what retail media is, it's where retailers are becoming media organizations in their own right. So when you walk into a supermarket, you might see digital screens at the front of the store. When you get a email from your loyalty program, some of that inventory and some of that space is actually funded by suppliers, right? So like Nestle, Coca-Cola, or whoever it is. The decision to go and work out what ads to show, when and who to send it to, and whether or not it actually had an impact, that's all driven by algorithms in the back end, data and algorithms. And so we found this really niche space in terms of how we help retailers go and build that capability. The second area we found, an area to deep dive into, is around workforce analytics. And this is still a very nascent area in Australia. Organizations aren't spending a lot of money here yet, but based on our view, we think that will change over the next 5-10 years. So we started to invest in building up this capability. And what that means is, how do you use data and insights to help improve performance of your workforce, or to reduce risk. To give you an example of some of the early work we've done is around sales performance. How do you start to identify traits and behaviors of great salespeople so that you can use that as a benchmark to uplift and close the capability gap of the rest of your team? So in some of the early work, we found, when you have a certain type of relationship with a customer, you found that there was higher deal sizes, higher conversion rates, shorter sales cycles, etc. And so the idea is, effectively, if you start to identify that across a whole range of other behaviors, you can start to nudge salespeople into the best behaviors and the best traits in order to improve overall performance.
And I think every business would love to nudge their salespeople into having better behaviors. I want to break down all three of those because they all sound fascinating. What I love is that you've designed your business for basically any type of business, because we've got the starters who are starting out with like a bridging type service, and then we've got workforce as well as this retail media, which is a nice little niche for you. But I want to start with the companies that are just starting, because I think we probably have a lot more of those in our midst than the others. So you mentioned that when you go into a company, you have a look and we figure out where the data is and how to put some governance around it and the capabilities and the structures, all these things that we need in place. I think when we look at companies, we kind of assume they're all great and they're all shiny. But when we start picking up the covers and looking underneath, they're generally a little bit messy. So I suppose the question is, when you go into a company and they want to get started, what are some of the biggest issues that you see or challenges that they're facing that would need your services? And then how do you go ahead and help them to fix that?
Yeah, look, I think one of the first things we see is what are the use cases they're trying to tackle? And like, to your point, even if you look at the top 50, 100 companies, there's a lot of organizations on that list that don't have it right. And so if you think you're alone, actually a lot of organizations are in the same space as you. Some are doing really well, right? Don't get me wrong, but most organizations aren't quite there yet. And so one of the first things we do see is, well, what are the use cases? All right, so there's some pretty easy use cases, but what are the most impactful use cases that's actually going to deliver business value? And sometimes when because what we often see is a lot of these, especially traditional businesses, I'm not talking about technology businesses, more traditional businesses like retail, property, whatever it is, a lot of leaders have come through the ranks of that organization and have started from the bottom and made their way up, right? And so you have this cohort of leaders that don't actually know better outside of that organization. And so they haven't seen what other, how things have been done elsewhere. And so what we often find is, well, how do you open up their eyes to the possibilities of the use cases that have been used by, one, competitors, or two, just completely outside that industry. And that's what the quantum business model had worked so well, because we were just cross-pollinating all these ideas across retail, FMCG, banking, telco, etc. So that was pretty cool. So that's typically number one. And then number two, which is, well, how do you start, like, if that's the case, if they're the use cases, then what sort of data that sits underneath that can be used to answer those use cases? And did you know that you can actually pull that data through, stitch it all together, and answer those questions? It's very similar with the workforce analytics space, that there's data that's sitting there about employees, as an example, that just never gets looked at or used. And so, you think about manufacturing as an example. There's data around incidences around people in their factories and some of the injuries that they occurred. There's data about engagement rates. There's data about compliance with training, etc. Well, what if you start to triangulate all those data sets together? Could you start to build a lead indicator of, before those instances occur, that leads to a workers' compensation claim? So it's actually really to bring that thinking of expanding the box on what to do with that information in the first place. Because once you figure that out, once you go, oh wait, okay, if we did that, we could save 50% of our workers' compensation cost, or we could improve our sales performance our sales team performance by 5%. The risk reward trade-off, you now worked out what the upside is. Okay, what's the risk for us to undertake that? Okay, it's going to cost a couple of $100,000 just to do a pilot or whatever it is, or get that going and demonstrate that use case, etc. Then you've now got this cost benefit analysis that's worth taking a punt on. And if it doesn't work, and sometimes these things don't work out because you're trying these things, then, well, you've kind of capped how much it was going to cost.
Do you want your team to achieve peak performance? Well, then it's time for a change. Welcome to Leading Edge. We're not about traditional training. We're about transformation. Our outcomes-based leadership development programs focus on real results through behavior change and mindset shifts. We customize programs tailored to your team's needs, packed with cutting-edge content based on neuroscience and positive psychology. We run engaging workshops, personalized coaching sessions, and practical exercises to ensure an enriching experience for your team. How does it work? We dive deep. We start with surveys to identify strengths and gaps, which helps us to design a bespoke program designed for your team's success. With our approach, progress is inevitable. Our expertly facilitated workshops and coaching sessions ensure growth, and the results speak for themselves. Are you ready to take the leap? It's simple. First, choose your program. We have 5 to choose from, or you can customize a program to suit your team's needs. Second, pick your duration. We deliver 3, 6, or 12-month programs. This way, we can reinforce the learnings over time to drive real change. And finally, plan with us. Each team is different, so we make sure that what we're delivering is exactly what you need. Let's unlock your team's potential together. Contact us today, and let's start this journey to transform your team to achieve greatness. It sounds like you need to be asking the right questions. So how important is it to know what questions to ask versus letting the data actually help you come up and find potential and ideas on how to solve the problem?
Fantastic question. I think it's like it's circular. So what often happens is you ask a question, you look into the data to answer that question, you come up with 10 other questions. All right. Really simple example. We were doing this piece of work around how to drive demand through better marketing, better targeting, etc. So super simple. And you dig into we're working with this client. You dig into the data and go, hey, okay, when we ran this campaign, we saw incremental uplift during this particular period. But what we saw was the conversion rate increased slightly, but there was a lot of increases coming from average values that people were booking more. Okay, what's actually going on? What's actually going on there, right? So we thought, hey, we ran the campaign, we saw an uplift in total sales. That should be it. But you then start to dig into the data and then go, oh, actually, what was happening was because we were booking around, like we're sending those campaigns out in January. We're actually getting people were still on school holidays. So we're getting people who were coming in and booking whatever's left of that school holiday on this campaign. And then the second part was they had just gone on a holiday recently. They really enjoyed that holiday and they booked 12 months in advance as well. And so you start to unpick. Like you start to get, you start to surface more questions as you go, as you start to look at the data, and that's kind of the beauty of it. And so, when you go and undertake these projects, there is a balancing act between trying to do too much in the first go versus trying to answer that specific question. Because when you go and try to answer a specific question, you may not actually be finding the answer you're looking for because you had asked the wrong question. But you don't always know that was the wrong question in advance. You just don't know that until you actually look at the information. And so that's why things like just even having like business intelligence tools like Power BI and tools like that is very helpful and useful, especially when it's connected to live data, because you can have someone go and interrogate that a little bit, but not every organization has that set up yet.
When you're running this, it sounds like it's taking time. I mean, you pick a hypothesis. I think this is going to be our challenge. We're going to test it. We find out that actually it's due to 3 other different things. Sounds like this takes time to be able to do, a lot of patience, a lot of buy-in. How important is it to have the sponsor on board and driving this? What kind of stakeholders do you need in this kind of project? Because if a company's setting this up, and they're going in blind, what do they need to have in place to make sure that their first AI project is going to be successful?
Yeah, great question. Buy-in needs to come from the top. Like we haven't seen many successful projects and implementations where there was not senior buy-in. And when I talk about senior, I'm talking about the CEO, the leader of the organization, has to give his team the leeway and the capacity to go and test these things out, experiment, and sometimes it not working out, right? And so that needs to be in place. Then you also have to have like that innovative champion or that courageous champion within the organization who, he's willing to give it a go. I mean, that old adage that no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, right? And that's often what we see sometimes. Like it's quite easy for an executive who's looking after an area to kind of take the lower lower risk approach. So senior sponsorship is important. But it's not just about, hey, go do this in your spare time as well. It's actually, you got to put some skin in the game. You got to put some budget, resources, people, who it is, to go and give that now executive a chance to make it work.
That is really interesting that we have to keep the leader on board and focused. And I presume sometimes you probably have to give them a bit of a nudge when they get distracted. But yeah, absolutely. Leading from the top is so important. But I suppose there's probably some sort of a knowledge gap when you get most of your clients. I mean, to have to explain to them what an algorithm is or a data strategy or what data governance even means. Is that part of your role as well, to come in and educate?
Yeah. So, some of our clients, we spend a bit of time with them over sometimes years on the education process before they're actually ready to take that leap. Some have come from sometimes it just takes something to happen in market for an organization to go, okay, we actually got to look at this stuff, all right? And that's what ChatGPT did for the AI space. It got everyone talking about it. It got boards talking about it. It got executives talking about it. Hey, we actually need to look at this space. The downside of that is then you got every person coming out saying they're an AI expert, even though they might have been in the space for a couple of years, so,
a couple of minutes.
a couple of minutes. So you do get that as well. So there is that educational process that you have to go through. I've often find the best education is around case studies and examples that are very specific to their industry and how it can be applied to that industry. That's really the first part. Then the second part is they need to believe that it can work for them. There's got to be that belief, a bit of a leap of faith. You can put as much business case and numbers around it, but if you haven't done it before, you don't really know until you try and give it a go.
That must be hard for them sometimes to sell back up to the CEO and the board to say, look, we're trying. We're sure there's some ROI in here. Do you sometimes help out in that process?
Yeah, we definitely do. So one of the things is really trying to understand what some of those barriers are to the reason why they go, yep, let's give this a go. Especially in this environment, cost is probably the biggest one right now, which is a cost constrained environment. And so trying new things is really, really difficult. So we often work with whoever the champion is on, okay, let's workshop 4 use cases, all right? And some of these, to try shortcut all of that, you want to go and work with the domain experts within the organization to go and try to find, to learn from them and learn about their hypotheses and what's driving some of their gut decisions, and use that to go and form those ideas in the first place. So you kind of formulate those ideas and go, well, okay, how do things normally get approved in your organization? Some are pretty formal business case type workflows where you go, okay, all right, what's the resources needed? What's the data needed? What's legal going to think about this? What's procurement going to think about this? All that sort of stuff, right? And so you got to work through those processes. And those processes are there for a reason, protect the organization, etc. Right? So you got to fit within that organization. Sometimes other organizations go, you know what? We're just as long as the number looks good and the ID seems plausible, let's just give it a go. And so they're obviously easier to work through. So this really depends on how the organization tackles change and transformation in terms of how the process we help guide them along.
Yeah, it sounds very much like a culture challenge. And yeah. And I imagine in industries like finance that are, say, highly regulated, makes that even more challenging. Have you worked in those industries?
We don't spend as much time in finance, to be honest, but because of some of those reasons, it does take a little bit longer to get through. We often find some of the traditional businesses where there's a bit more appetite and less highly regulated than that.
Yeah. Okay. So digging back into that, let's go back into media, because I think that's a topic that most people get. Most people will walk into a shopping center. Most people will walk into a supermarket. And you mentioned before that people get fed ads, whether, it's on a screen in front of when you walk in or your app or anywhere. I mean, sometimes it feels a little creepy. Tell me, is that what you're actually trying? Like, you're actually going in there really deeply understanding the customer, so it actually feels like you know them? And how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's, firstly, there's important regulation changes to legislation coming in terms of how you can start to use data for advertising purposes. And I think they're really important to protect how data is being used. You got to say, when you've been in the industry, in that particular industry for the last 10 odd years, that you have seen some pretty cowboyish behavior from organizations around how data is being used, and probably to too much of a creepy level. What we often find is actually it's not just even being too creepy. Like, when you're too targeted, you actually don't get the returns for the extra effort to be that targeted. And so, give you an example, like with retailers at the moment, where we're helping them build a retail media business. The initial idea most organizations will have is, hey, what if we had 10,000 different segmentations of our customer and put them into buckets of hundreds of people so that it's really, really tightly targeted. Well, actually, one, it doesn't really make business and economical sense. So even if you wanted to, you don't make much money on trying to reach an audience of a couple of hundred people. So business sense, it doesn't make sense. And then secondly, you actually end up wanting to have larger audiences to generate any kind of return for the investment that you make into the campaign in the first place. And so what we often find is targeting doesn't have to be super niche and targeted to an individual in a lot of those environments, and can have pretty broad brush targeting and still have a pretty good return. You will find though, when you have, say for example, loyalty programs are obviously a big one in the space, right? That when you do have, I guess that value exchange between the customer and yourself, you can get down to more targeted levels and actually generate higher customer satisfaction. We've seen with some previous loyalty programs that we worked with, that actually some of the algorithms that we built, which actually got down to one-to-one level targeting, because it was actually a bit of a shopping list reminder, right? So if you think about a supermarket and you go, hey, look, we looked at your behaviors, and typically you buy, I don't know, toilet paper every 6 weeks. Hey, it's actually now coming up for you to buy toilet paper, and it's 22% off. As a consumer, you're like, well, actually, that's a pretty good deal and service. So there's actually a value exchange from that. So that's where it does make sense to actually get down to that level. And we had saw that with this loyalty program, that you actually had lower unsubscribe rates and high customer satisfaction as a result of doing that.
And it's nice because, as a consumer, it's, me, my behavior, you get me. Look, I am an avid user of loyalty programs. Yeah, shout out to Qantas and Woolworths. But funnily enough, I actually sign up to every single one of them. My daughter goes into shops now and gives them my details. And she says, how are you a member of every single loyalty program? Well, spend a bit of time in the shops. Well, so do you have any cool examples of, shops that you've worked with where they've basically gone from nothing, as in, give them your details and they don't do anything with them, to actually putting a loyalty program in, and then they've got some super, ROI out the back of it?
Without naming names, well, my previous organization, we did a lot of work with loyalty programs and worked with Woolworths across all the various different variations of that programs. Like, there's a reason why loyalty programs are worth a lot of money, right? And there's a reason why organizations put a lot of money into them, because they work. They work. They work for the benefit of not just the organization, but as a consumer. As you said, if you're a loyalty, I'm a Velocity member, not exactly Qantas, and I use it pretty religiously, like, because I get benefits from it. You cut the line, you get to go on first, you get extra baggage. You go to the lounge. There's all these benefits, and as a consumer, I'm okay with that.
But you're giving away your data then. So everything, they know exactly when you walk in, when you shop, when you buy, what you buy, how much you buy. They know so much about you. So this is how they target you. I mean, what are some, I suppose, data points that maybe we don't know about that we're actually being tracked?
Look, before I go into that, I think one of the things that we talk to organizations about is the ethical use of data, and what are the use cases that you want to use data for, and what are the things that you don't want to use it for. I mean, there was that famous example of Target back in the day, who found out a girl was pregnant before her family actually did, based on the products that she was buying in the store, right? And so there's those use cases that you want to make sure you stay away from, even if you know that information that you have about someone. We used to call it the today tonight test, which is, hey, the law's here, but actually you want to be here. You want to avoid being on today tonight or current affairs or whatever it is around how data is being used. And so I think the interesting about the data point, it's not just about a single data point that you know about someone. It's about, once you start to stitch together various different data points, how you can start to paint a picture about who you are, whether you tend to buy high-end products or you tend to go shop budget or mainstream. Are you likely to have kids at school, or are you single at home, and those sorts of things. So it's, once you start to triangulate some of that information you have, like, what's the picture that you can form of that.
So it really is taking it from, if you're a marketing team, and rather than saying, I want females from 18 to 24, you're actually putting a persona on top of it, using that data to actually depersonalize, yet also at the same time really personalize how you actually talk to your customers.
Exactly, that's correct.
Now, you mentioned just before ethics, which is obviously a really important skill that's required. So if we have companies that are looking into putting AI in, or they're actually even early on the journey, what are some of the skills that are needed across the organization, from, leadership, senior leadership, all the way down to frontline?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of different roles within a data when it comes to data and AI. It's not just the technical roles. I mean, there's new roles being created. Like, you probably heard the term prompt engineers, people who can formulate the best prompts to give the best answer out of a LLM capability. So there's continual roles being created. Generally we find you need someone who is obviously the senior sponsor of that organization and can make those business decisions. you also need people on the business side. So who are the people, who are the GMs or the frontline force that this technology is going to impact the most? Because actually it's critical to understand, well, how are they doing things today? Because if you don't know how they're doing things today, you don't know the roadmap to how they should be or how they could be doing things in future. So you need people from the business. They're really important. You'll need people from cybersecurity, right? So each organization will have a different risk tolerance in terms of how they protect the organization's data. So you need to understand how they think about it. You'll need people from privacy and legal in terms of, well, what permissions do they have to use a customer data in the first place? There'll be some sensitive data which is just off limits, or the organization has taken a viewpoint that actually, we don't want to use this data at all, even though we collect it, and we might actually get rid of it every 3 months. So we don't have the ability to do that, right? And we know some organizations have done that. An example is like email receipts. Like some organizations collect email receipt data, but they discard it because they've taken a viewpoint. They're not going to use that, right? And so they're just people that aren't, they're the non-data people that you need. You then need a change manager or program manager or whoever it is who goes, all right, now when we go and deliver against this capability, how do we now implement it in the business, right? The rule of thumb that I've always operated under was that it probably takes twice as long to go and implement a capability in the business when it comes from a data and AI perspective than it is to actually build a capability in the first place, right? It takes time. Everyone's got their day jobs, right? And then, they've got 5 different things being thrown at them saying, hey, you got to change the way you do this. You got to upskill on this. You got to train on this. And then now you got to change the way you do things, right? And that takes time. And then finally you got your people in data people, in data, and you've got there's so many different roles, right? You've got data scientists, data analysts, data engineers, data architects, machine learning engineers, people who come from data governance, and there's so many different roles. And it's how you construct a team to go and deliver on that capability as well. There was a bit of a brain fart there, but
that was good. Well, it's funny because I was thinking, to wrap up, I was thinking about your career, coming from actuary to AI. And I'm thinking, if somebody today would want to decide, actually, I want to have AI, you don't actually have to have AI as your job, because it sounds like everyone in the organization can actually have it as part of their job. So to wrap up, what advice would you give to somebody, and it's to anyone in the organization and any company who wants to get more experience and maybe take part in a project, or what do you suggest that they do so they can be part of this AI future?
Yeah, look, I think one is just get educated, read, right? There's a lot of good material out there. And when I say read and get educated, I'm not talking about going and doing a technical course on how to build a LLM or anything like that. It's read about how it's being used elsewhere in other organizations around the world. There's lots of cool case studies about where it has worked, but just as importantly, get yourself educated on where it doesn't work as well. Because you will find that for every one great case study, there's 10 that's like, oh, okay, this didn't quite work. And it's just as important to learn that. The second is network yourself with people with experience as well on what things have worked and what things haven't. So that's another way to get educated. And then the third thing is within the organization, like how do you, like if you're in a position of power and responsibility, how do you go and start to drive some experimentation up amongst your peer group? And like put your hands up to say, hey, look, there's this thing that's costing my business lots of money because I have to generate, let's say for a sales team, I have to generate 100 proposals a week. And that's costing me 10 FTE, right? imagine if I implement this, I think I could save 6 FTE and redeploy them into high value roles, right? And so you go, okay, this could be interesting. Let's now explore how I could do that, experiment, pilot, iterate, keep and try again. One, actually builds yourself as a innovation leader, not just amongst your peers, but also within the industry. So it's going to look good on your CV, your own CV as well. But two, if you figure that out, then your peers will want to jump on board. And that's how you start to catalyze change, because they see, oh, actually it can be done. How can I now do this in my business? And it just becomes a bit of a snowball effect.
That's great. Well, I hope someone listening is inspired, because it's such a cool area to be working in. Lawrence, thank you so much for being here. How can our listeners reach out to you?
Look, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm assuming my name will be on this. So you can find me on LinkedIn, or I'm sure I can share my email as well. And that's probably the quickest way.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.